this is a story about how $4 billion company Cristiano Ronaldo and even a mysterious murder in Connecticut became linked through one invisible idea, and how a piece of plastic on the wrist quietly became one of the most powerful psychological technologies of the 21st century.
To understand how far this can go, we need to start not with a unicorn startup or a world-class athlete, but with a crime scene. In 2015, in the US state of Connecticut, police were investigating the death of a woman named Connie DeBate. Her husband claimed she died early in the morning, about 40 minutes before he returned home. The evidence was messy and his alibi sounded convincing. On paper, it looked like a tragic domestic accident with no clear villain. But there was another witness no one noticed at first: her fitness tracker. Connie's Fitbit kept recording movement for almost an hour after the supposed time of death. One quiet line in a digital activity log contradicted an entire human story. The device on her wrist became a witness in court. She could no longer speak, but her data did.
Police put together a nearly minute-to-minute digital timeline.
Since then, similar cases have appeared in legal databases in the US, Canada, and the UK. Fitness trackers have confirmed and destroyed alibis, proven someone was awake when they claimed to be asleep or moving when they were supposed to be dead. Biometric stopped being just numbers about your health and became testimony. And this is where the real question begins. What happens when the thing on your wrist, the thing that promises better sleep, cleaner recovery, and higher performance, slowly becomes an economic engine, a psychological habit, and sometimes a silent witness? If you've ever worn a smartwatch, bracelet, or a ring, this story is about how that device quietly rewired your sense of control, sleep, or stress, and even your trust in your own body. We used to wake up and ask, "How do I feel?" Now millions wake up and think, "Why does the app say I slept badly?" We stopped listening to the body and started negotiating with numbers. Because this industry doesn't just promise performance, it sells certainty, and certainty, when it becomes a ritual, turns into control. Follow the story far enough, and you reach a question almost no one is ready for. What happens when the most intimate part of your existence, your nervous system, your sleep, your stress, your heartbeat, becomes not a feeling but evidence? Not an intuition but a subscription product? Not your private state but a metric someone else can use? That world isn't coming, it's already here. And it started the moment a wearable stopped counting steps and began testifying. To understand how we reached this point, how a device designed for jogging and calorie counts became a cultural operating system, we need to go back to the moment recovery stopped being background noise and started becoming the center of performance. Not in Silicon Valley, not in a lab, but in a university library where a student athlete was asking a question that almost no one in mainstream sport even recognized as a problem.
You're watching Dr. Claw's channel, where we connect the unseen threads between data, power, and destiny.
His name was Will Ahmed, captain of Harvard's squash team, disciplined, precise, built for performance. His training, nutrition, and mindset was perfect. Yet some mornings he woke up feeling worse than before, not tired from work, but depleted by something deeper and unmeasured, a silent physiological debt. Coaches told him to train harder. Doctors told him to rest more. None of them could explain why the body sometimes collapses without a single visible injury. So he did something almost no elite athlete ever does. He stopped listening to intuition and started reading medical journals, sleep research, and cardiac physiology, studies on autonomic nervous system regulation that even many scientists ignore. For weeks he sat in the university library reading medical journals about recovery physiology, a field of medicine that almost no one in sports talked about at the time. He learned about microscopic fluctuations between heartbeats, heart rate variability, that can reveal far more about the body's condition than miles, calories, or average heart rate. And he realized something that was far from obvious then: the world measures load, but almost no one measures recovery. The body constantly sends signals, and almost no one listens. This is how the idea of Whoop appeared, not as just another gadget, but as a system that measures the body's readiness for strain, a kind of hearing we did not have. For Ahmed, focusing on elite athletes wasn't a marketing trick, it was a principle. First you survive in the harshest niche, where there is no margin for error, and only then you scale to everyone else. Investors hated that strategy. Too narrow, too slow, too risky. But it gave Whoop something more important than hype: credibility under pressure. Many years later, the symbol of its arrival appeared. Cristiano Ronaldo didn't just wear Whoop, he invested in it. In the partnership announcement, the narrative was clear. His biological age looked younger than his passport age, proving that data could extend peak performance.
What does it say?
I don't believe it's so good, eh?
For Ronaldo fans, this was branding. For Whoop, it was a cultural breakthrough. The body was no longer just biology, it was an asset, and the asset now came with a dashboard. You can laugh at the marketing, but this moment marks the shift from elite physiology to everyday psychology, where not just Ronaldo but ordinary people begin their mornings by checking recovery scores before checking in with themselves. A new ritual forms. Green means you can live today, red means something is wrong. Two new emotions appear: guilt for a bad night and anxiety from any deviation in the score. 1 in 3 adults in the United States now wears a fitness tracker, and with that scale came side effects. Studies show that wearable device use among patients with atrial fibrillation is linked to significantly higher anxiety. Around 1 in 5 experience fear triggered by data notifications. The device built to calm you down can quietly become the device that scares you. And yet most people still don't realize one thing. Whoop is not a medical device. Legally, it is a wellness product. It does not diagnose and it does not replace a doctor.
So it's a meaningful statistic. It's not perfect. This isn't a medical device, but it's really a very key early indicator.
But in interviews, Ahmed openly said he wanted medical-grade measurement without hospital stigma. On paper, wellness. In practice, almost clinical monitoring. In the mindset of users, somewhere between the two. The first Whoop prototypes didn't look like sleek wearables. They were elastic straps tested by rowers, collecting data continuously, even at rest. If something can be measured, it can be managed.
That philosophy defined everything that came next. By 2018, wearables became mainstream. Apple Watch, Fitbit, Aura, Garmin. Whoop took the opposite path. No screen, subscription instead of purchase, minimalism instead of apps. Ahmed believed a screen would break the idea. Whoop had to be invisible, but see everything. The quieter the device, the deeper it penetrates real life. The less it feels like technology, the more it becomes infrastructure.
Then came the pandemic. When the world shut down and people lost control, Whoop and its clinical partners analyzed breathing and HRV changes as potential early signs of respiratory infection. Tens of thousands began using the app as a psychological anchor. Data became certainty, and certainty became comfort. But when a technology provides comfort, we must ask, what is this comfort built on? What remains invisible? Behind Whoop's minimalism, behind the mindfulness rhetoric, behind the ritual of checking recovery every morning, there is an infrastructure few users think about. Formally, Whoop is headquartered in Boston, but in reality, like all modern hardware, it depends on global manufacturing networks. Public job listings and scattered sourcing data indicate ties to contract manufacturers in Asia, reportedly including Shenzhen Area Assembly and Hong Kong Logistics.
Whoop never discloses the factory names, not because of scandal, but because this is how the hardware world works. The device is transparent, the user is transparent, the supply chain is not. This is the new architecture of trust. The person becomes visible, while the system remains opaque. But even that is not the deepest shift.
The real transformation began when sensation turned into measurement. Sleep became a rating. Recovery became a task. Rest became an obligation. Even motivation behaves strangely under measurement. Research shows that highly active users often move less once they see themselves at the top of a leaderboard, as if the metric gives them psychological permission to stop. Data meant to inspire becomes an invisible ceiling. Psychologists call this the effect of quantitative feedback, when numbers become so central that internal sensations weaken in comparison. In Whoop and Aura communities, people joke that a morning without data is a morning without memory. It's a joke with too much truth. A morning without a recovery diagram already feels wrong to many. And here the most powerful force appears: continuity. Whoop tracks heart rate and respiration constantly and HRV mostly at night, when noise is lowest. The more continuous the monitoring, the more accurate the forecasting, and the harder it becomes to quit. Not because the company forces you, but because stopping breaks the narrative your brain now expects to complete. Whoop boosts its scientific credibility with academic advisors, cardiologists, sleep researchers, and peer-reviewed papers. But the more Whoop's language resembles medical language, the more carefully its claims must be worded. In regulation, the difference between insight and interpretation can be the difference between consumer wellness and clinical advice. And the moment you cross that line, you enter medical device law. By the late 2020s, Whoop is no longer just a product. It is a behavioral experiment running on millions of people.
It proves that recovery is trends, data is a mirror, and health is a process. But it also introduced a new form of control, soft, voluntary, but powerful. The technology doesn't dictate, it suggests, and we obey, because we have learned to interpret suggestions as a care. And then something subtle but dangerous appears. If data becomes a mirror, the absence of data becomes anxiety.
People describe a strange experience, as if a day does not count if no diagram appears in the morning. I took off the bracelet, and the day disappeared. I woke up without a sync, and everything felt wrong. This isn't dependency on the device, it's dependency on the rhythm. Researchers studied users who tracked every day for months and were asked to stop for just a week. Within days, they reported irritability, reduced focus, poor sleep, and psychological discomfort. Not because their health changed, but because their feedback loop broke. Not using the device felt like losing control. In scientific literature, this phenomenon now has a name: quantitative anxiety. Anxiety triggered not by a bad result, but by the absence of a result at all. A device built to create certainty becomes a source of fear when it stops working. Another term has already entered sleep medicine: orthosomnia. Sleep disruption caused by trying to optimize sleep data. In 2017, clinicians documented patients whose sleep worsened not because they felt bad, but because their devices showed low sleep scores. Numbers became more powerful than sensations, and that broke sleep. Data does not only reflect, it reshapes behavior and physiology. Which is why Whoop, a device designed to reduce anxiety, can also fuel it. Not because Whoop is faulty, but because we now see life as numbers and have forgotten how to live without them. And at this point, another layer appears, the economic one, because every modern technology comes with an economic code. For Whoop, that code is subscription. The strap is minimal, almost symbolic. The real product is continuity. You don't buy Whoop once, you buy the right to keep measuring yourself.
Every additional month of subscription increases valuation. Every cancellation threatens projections. So UI becomes a financial instrument. Entry must be frictionless. Exit must require intent. UX designers call it soft retention. Users call it "I will cancel later."
Whoop adapts to this logic but wraps it in softer language. The longer you stay, the more accurate your data, the more personal the insights. But the principle is universal. The system becomes more valuable to you over time, and you become more valuable to the system. Data creates recommendations. Recommendations create more data. It is science, but also economics. I experienced this directly when I cancelled my Whoop subscription in November 2025. Not because the device was bad, it was excellent, but because I wanted to wake up and understand my condition without a graph. The cancellation process became the perfect metaphor. First, a survey asking why. Then, an option to pause instead of quitting. Then, a reminder of the data I would lose. Only at the final screen appeared the actual button, discreet, polite, as if whispering, "Are you sure?" And then, just before the exit, a 10% discount appeared. A soft, friendly barrier, a psychological speed bump, a loop so gentle it felt like care.
That's the subscription economy, not force, friction, not restriction, suggestion. Loyalty as UX, not commitment.
Of course, regulators noticed. In Europe, the Digital Services Act now targets dark patterns. France enforces simple cancellation rules. Germany requires a permanent cancellation button. The UK is tightening consumer protection around renewals. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission is advancing click to cancel, demanding that unsubscribe must be as easy as subscribe, though the legal fight continues. But subscriptions are only surface architecture. Beneath them lies a deeper system, chargebacks. In the US, a chargeback can wipe out revenue instantly, which is why American subscription services design defensive retention funnels.
When a customer disputes a credit or debit card transaction with their issuing bank, whereas a refund.
In Europe, the culture is different. Regulators handle transparency in advance, so cancellations are easier and friction is lower. The system is held accountable before the conflict, not after. But even that is just the economic layer. The bigger shift begins when the data of one person becomes the data of an entire group. Whoop was born as a tool for self-awareness, but when they launched Whoop Unite, a platform for teams and companies, it became clear that personal physiology can turn into collective infrastructure. Inside companies, the bracelet doesn't track individuals, it tracks departmental well-being. HR sees only aggregated, anonymized data, average sleep, recovery trends, strain patterns. Formally, this prevents burnout. Officially, participation is voluntary. In practice, metrics always become norms. Teams with high recovery scores are praised. Teams with low scores look like a problem area. Even if names are hidden, green becomes a virtue. Red becomes an excuse.
Soft pressure is born not through algorithms but through culture. Nobody forces employees to wear the device. Nobody needs to turn the recovery score into a KPI. People start comparing themselves voluntarily, and the system quietly does the rest. Whoop becomes a symbol of discipline without command, a reminder that feels like support. But in the world of KPIs, a reminder often feels like obligation.
Lawyers call this the gray zone. In the EU, new AI and data protection rules classify systems using physiological or biometric data in employment as high risk and subject to audits, transparency, and safeguards against discrimination. Manufacturers insist they are wellness tools, not medical instruments. But the line between insight and recommendation gets thinner every year, especially when people change behavior based on those insights. The industry is now moving toward predictive logic, and Whoop, Oura, Fitbit, Garmin Health, they're not just building devices anymore. They're building early warning systems for burnout, illness, cognitive decline, and workplace risk. For employers, that looks like care. For employees, like another layer of observation. In the 20th century, business measured time. In the early 21st, it measured attention. Now it is beginning to measure physiology, not to punish, but to reduce risk. Yet any risk reduction system eventually shapes freedom. And sometimes the data goes far beyond companies. In 2018, the global Strava heat map revealed outlines of secret military bases simply by showing where soldiers jogged at night. No breach, no hack, just unintentionally exposed behavior. It was a warning: the individual cannot see the map. The institution always can. And the same logic is now entering law and criminal justice. The very same category of wearable that convicted a murderer in Connecticut is now used in courtrooms worldwide. Devices confirm or contradict timelines. Logs reveal movement, sleep, and physiological stress. Biometrics are no longer passive, they are evidence. It has reached the point where people use biometric logs against each other. In 2023, a Reddit post went viral. A woman noticed spikes in her husband's heart rate on his Oura ring at 2 a.m. at the exact time he claimed to be asleep. She concluded he was cheating. The ring didn't prove anything, but the data became a story on its own. The company had to publicly clarify that heart rate spikes are not behavioral evidence, but the internet had already made its judgment. The legal boundary is shifting too. In 2025, a federal jury ruled that Apple violated a medical device patent held by Massimo because pulse oximetry in the Apple Watch crossed into clinical territory.
A consumer tech product became a medical device in the eyes of the court. Apple appealed, Massimo enforced. Regulators were forced to answer a new question: when does wellness stop being wellness?
This is the terrain Whoop now navigates, not just physiology, but psychology, law, economics, and governance. And we have not even reached the final stage, prediction. Whoop already detects illness before symptoms. Oura predicts menstrual cycles before biology confirms them. Apple Watch flags arrhythmias before a doctor sees them. At first, that feels like magic, then like safety. But eventually it raises a question humanity has never had to answer. If a system knows how you will feel before you do, who should have authority over your behavior? You or the model? And what happens when refusing to wear the device becomes the suspicious act? That's the core paradox of the wearable condition. The more precisely we measure ourselves, the more measurable we become to others. The more we quantify life, The more we outsource authority, the more certainty we gain, the more freedom becomes negotiable. And yet, this does not have to be dystopia. The same devices that can create dependency can also detect heart disease, prevent burnout, optimize recovery, and restore a sense of bodily literacy modern life has erased. The technology is not the problem. The system around it is. The most important right of the next decade may not be the right to access our data, but the right to remain unmeasured. Not because of paranoia, but because of freedom. A body that can never exist outside optimization is not healthy. It is monitored. A mind that cannot tolerate a day without metrics is not self-aware. It is conditioned.
The future of wearables will not be shaped by engineering, but philosophy. The question is not whether the data is useful, it's whether we still remember how to live without it. Because long before recovery scores, readiness charts and strain indexes, there was one universal measurement: a heartbeat. Silent, unscored, unoptimized. Proof that we are alive without needing to prove anything. And that is where this story must end, not with a warning, but with a reminder. You do not need to destroy the system to stay human. You only need to recognize where the system ends and where life begins.
You watch Dr. Claus, the place where we connect dots that seem unrelated at first, but together form a map of the future. Subscribe and stay with us. The next story is already on its way.